Good lord, that face cam looks terrible. Hello everyone. Happy New Year. Are you meant to say that on New Year's Eve? Either way, it is New Year's Eve. And there will be a New Year's Day present that will go live at midnight. At the turning of the age, one might say. Anyway, I'm here today with a long-awaited, for me, next episode of Update Retrospective. Now, Tyler is just not with us for recording today for multiple pretty justifiable reasons, and also one not so justifiable reason in that he just doesn't really like these. But him not really just being up for recording today has presented an opportunity, both timely and unique, in that I get to do something Deep Rock related that Tyler wouldn't necessarily want to be a part of, which, you know, I think every other time that it's been a video on our own, or without the other one, it's been on another topic completely, except like the latest build video, which you can check out. Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out the face cam, by the way. I know I should definitely have it by now, but the reason I don't is because I'm trying to figure it out without actually having a professional lighting setup, and chances are that's not going to happen. I know there are like a proper lights I could buy, but I'm not going to get a full setup. It's just not how we operate. I'm not putting, you know, my all into this. That doesn't sound good, does it? It doesn't sound like I care. I do care. Anyway, like I said, this is Update Retrospective, which is a series that I actually love doing. It's where we look at previous updates for Deep Rock, going from the very beginning. We sort of evaluate their, you know, impact at the time and the impact that they've had over time on the game. Obviously, this is episode 3, but we're talking about update 4, which sounds a bit odd. But like I said, it's been a while since we've done this. I think you understand what's going on, sort of when we get into it. It makes a lot of sense, and I'd like to thank just sort of the wiki curators for this these pages. They're just super helpful, especially the dev Q&A page. They're doing the Lord's work. They're making a lot of our videos actually happen. So thanks to those guys. But let's get on with it. Update 4, Home in Orbit, most notably introduced the Space Rig, Nitra and support drops. They went live on June 29th, 2017. So, you know, going way back, like quite a while before we even started playing. And immediately you can note Space Rig and Nitra were introduced this update, which is wild. Two of the most important things in the game, Space Rig arguably one of the most important things in the game, as in far more important than Nitra. Space Rig is equally as important as the game itself, as the missions themselves, I'd argue. But let's get into the actual patch notes. New features, which immediately entails new ores. Nitra was introduced in this update, which is used for resupply pods, as gold was previously used to pay for resupplies. Bitter Gem was also added as a bonus ore, and Jaded was added as a bonus ore. So what that tells us is that this actually was crafting materials, basically. Now, I couldn't tell you exactly what the state of weapon upgrades is at this point in the game's sort of lifetime, but I can tell you that they didn't use the typical minerals, you know, Jaded Bismol, Enor Pearls, Cropper, Magnite, and Luminite. Those weren't a thing at the time, or at least they weren't used for weapon upgrades. So Jade actually occupies the exact same position as Bitter Gem does, just as bonus ores that just give you bonus credits. It's as simple as that. Nitra, however, is far more important. Although it's still notable that Jaded didn't used to be a crafting material, it used to just be Bitter Gem. Jaded was green as well, and well, Jaded is still green, but Bitter Gem would have been yellow at this point as well, not purple. But what's notable is the introduction of Nitra, used for resupply pods, and previously gold was used to pay for resupplies. I'm not sure if it'll tell us exactly how gold has changed, if it was changed at all, except for the fact it's not used for resupplies. I think it's still used to give you credits and XP. But now it doesn't have that secondary function. Now Nitra is dedicated to that, and I think having that distinction is very important and has aided Deep Rock's identity. I think it's actually very important that gold is just gold. Gold is so well defined in Deep Rock because it's exactly what you'd expect. It's just a mineral that looks shiny, it looks like gold, it's satisfying to mine, and you get money for mining it, and that's it. It ends there. Introducing a different mineral to be used to call for resupply pods makes a lot more sense, actually. And nitro is also a very important part of the game too. And have the two be so distinct in terms of look, in terms of how they feel to mine, in terms of what they're used for, it just speaks to Ghost Ship's sort of understanding of what things should and shouldn't be used for. At the same time, it wasn't just resupply pods. There were more support drops than that. So, new support drops. There you go. Floodlight was introduced. These would greatly light the area around it and requires 40 gold to be summoned. So, gold is actually still used for these. Nitro was created exclusively for resupply pods, and that hasn't changed. They've just got rid of these other support drops. They have a floodlight. I believe it was like permanent. Imagine, so we got the floodlight and the auto turret here. The auto turret would have 500 bullets, 60 gold to be summoned. Think Minehead. The Minehead has auto turrets on it and flashlights. That's exactly what these are. And I think that they were just placed onto the Minehead later on when the point extraction game mode was sort of created. It's interesting that these still use gold and that Nitro was created specifically for resupplies. And I think it's a sort of probably a combination of them wanting gold to be very pure and very transparent like subject in the game. And also that they didn't necessarily believe in these as support drops. That they just sort of got rid of them entirely instead of, changing them so they require Nitro to be summoned. I think there is cause to potentially bring these back in some way. Although I believe in that more for a endless mode, sort of a almost tower defense, like sort of a mix between tower defense and COD zombies. That's how I envisage an endless mode. But I'm not going to get into that here. But I would like to have seen a version of the game where we kept these and have them be summoned through Nitro as well. Obviously, Nitro be worn a bit thin, and I think spending 40 Nitro in a lot of missions, spending 40 Nitro on what my British accent almost just came through there a little bit. Not that it doesn't, just usually it just came through a bit more than it normally does. Yeah, I think in a lot of missions, half resupplies with Nitro on a big light might not have been such an attractive prospect to a lot of players. You can see why they dropped that. And I think the auto turret, I think they'd rather people just summon their own bullets instead of summoning something to shoot bugs for them. I think it's fair. There is now a cat in the room. Maybe I need to get rid of her. There she is. Her name's Nelly. She won't be interrupting this recording anymore. Right, I'm back, and the beast has been dispatched. So the meat, the patch notes themselves. First pass on progression and upgrade systems. Completing a mission earns you XP and credits. Wow, what a surprise! So you can see some really foundational stuff being sort of built here. XP gained counts towards 2 tiers of progression at the same time, account wide and per character, which is something that multiple sort of levels is not an uncommon thing, but I think the way that Deep Rock does it is very distinct, and to see that this was really in place very early on is actually, I was about to say it gives me hope, that's not really right. It just shows that Ghost Ship have always had their fantastic instincts, or at least they did have fantastic instincts. That we had sort of the player rank and class rank already distinguished. Credits can be spent on upgrades for your equipment and weapons, so like I said, really foundational stuff, only really basic stuff, really only coming out now. Playing on high difficulties gives you a bonus to both XP and credits. I don't think that surprises anyone. It's not exactly revolutionary. That's not changing the game so much as it's just natural accomplice to these other features. Gems. The caves can now have gems embedded in the walls. Learn to identify the clues, dig the gems out, deposit them in your mule. Each gem gives you bonus credits on mission completion. So that is just Jadis and Bitter Gem at this point, which is kind of scary. So they were just introducing this concept of having things in the wall you can dig out, which I guess means point extraction wasn't a thing at this point. Well, no, it wasn't. None of the traditional mission types are really a thing at this point. And some traditional mission types will be introduced and then left behind. And we'll see that later on, though. The orbital space rig. The space rig serves as a place to select your mission, set up the team, select which character to play, as well as perform upgrades to your loadout. In your personal cabin is 2 terminals: character selection terminal, where you can buy upgrades and gear, or as well as buy upgrades for your gear, I should say. The Find Team terminal allows you to join missions already in progress. To set up a new mission, activate the large planet hologram right next to the drop pod. To depart and start the mission, head into the drop pod when you are done. Space rig. In my opinion, actually the most important thing that makes Deep Rock feel like Deep Rock. It's the dwarves' working hub. It's what makes it feel like you're working for a company and you're not just playing levels in a video game. Obviously, if you were to look at pictures of it, you'd understand how primitive it is at this point. And I think DOG Historian can show you a lot of that. So definitely check out his videos. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to the terminals that we have or don't have, the select character terminal, which really serves very limited function now, where it's literally just to select your character and your loadout, and that's it. But this time it was actually also the equipment terminal, which is now completely its own thing. Same goes for the Find Team terminal, which isn't a thing anymore and is just being completely folded into the Mission Select terminal, which is still where it is. It's the planet hologram next to the drop pod, that's correct. But of course that also serves as the server list, and that can also be accessed remotely anyway. New mineral to dig, Nitra. This is the new currency used for cooling down resupply drops from orbit. Identify Nitra by the caves. Identify Nitra in the caves by its red and matte look. I wouldn't call it matte, certainly not anymore. That's the shiniest thing I've ever seen. Yeah, obviously, got Nitra. We talked about it, and it is exclusively for resupplies at this time, which hasn't changed because gold is for the new types of orbital drops, the floodlight and auto turret, which you've also talked about. Yes. So this is actually important, I think. Great assistance if you're low on ammo but have a lot of gold to spend. As in, I think it said they cost 60 gold or 80 gold. That's meant to be quite expensive then, I guess. Which is interesting. That it's almost meant to be a bit of a sacrifice. I don't know if that meant that the gold was taken away from like your credits that you would earn at the end of the mission. I wouldn't assume so. Either way, we talked about these. They've come and gone. The influence is really only present in point extraction mission type, unlike Nitro, which is incredibly influential still to this day. I would like to see the floodlight and auto turret, or just support drops as a whole, make a return. They sort of make a return passively, in that there's always things that you can call down for specific purposes, but it's for specific purposes. These were alternate support drops that you could call in, as well as a resupply. All of the new stuff is like, you don't really get a choice when you get to call it in. The only thing that sort of breaks that is the cleaning equipment for the contagion spikes, where you can call it in wherever you want, but you still have to encounter a contagion spike to be able to call them in, which it's not like you would need them for anything else, but still. A new map, Green Depth, biggest map until now. It takes about 40 to 60 minutes to complete. So this is back when missions and biomes were almost blurred, and they did not exist at all in the way that they do now. And that's all I'll say on that. It doesn't really give us much to go on. We don't know what exactly it looks like, if it sort of spun off into a current mission type or a current biome. I'm sure a lot of them did, but that's all I can really say on that. Right, so where were we? Reworked HUD and menus. New unified look for all menus. Good. In-game HUD has been cleaned up. Good. Context-sensitive personal mineral inventory. That's actually quite important. As well as the item bar fades out when not in use, because you don't want to see that stuff all the time. That's like your hotbar. Well, no, you're not your hotbar, but kind of, because obviously it's what you've got in your inventory in terms of things that have been collected. I believe the mule is in the game at this point, but yeah, this is like really important. Context-sensitive personal mineral inventory. I mean, the game would barely work without that. You need to know how much you've got. Kind of. No, you do. This is just so important for so many reasons, and you know, it's kind of weird to think about it not like being a thing at any point, but there was a time when it wasn't a thing. Kind of crazy. All HUD and menus should be considered works in progress. We are absolutely not done. I think the HUD and menus are generally very good by now, so good job on that, Ghost Ship. That's something that I really can't criticise, not off the top of my head at least. Gameplay changes for enemies. Enemies now have support for weak points as well as armor. Now, I find this wording strange. I don't know if that means that these concepts have only just been introduced or if there was something wrong with them before, but either way, I guess it essentially means that they've been introduced. I mean, obviously, weak points, headshotting is such an inherent part of shooter games, arguably even more specific to FPSs. So, thank Christ we got that in, but I really love the way that the Ghost Ships handled weak points in terms of it feels specific to their game. You know, it's not just headshots. And, you know, crit spots are often in different places in games for different enemies. Yeah, that's definitely a common thing, but I think the way that Deep Rock does it is really bloody fantastic. Armor is also a very important concept, although it absolutely flies under the radar more than like the idea of weak points does. I think people do find armor a little bit hard to understand still. The fact that you do less damage to a grunt body than you would if its armor wasn't there. So a very important concept that I like how low-key the armor sort of concept is compared to weak points, and I like that there's that distinction. Everyone sort of understands the concept of critical hits, of headshots, but armor, not necessarily. That's a bit more ambiguous in what it means, especially when it comes to, you know, aliens. Things that you wouldn't expect to wear armor. Like, armor's sort of easy to understand in a game like Skyrim, where armor is armor that is worn. It's a little bit different. I like how abstract the concept of armor is, and that, you know, for some people, it might actually be an obstacle for some people in sort of their ability to deal with what the game throws at them without them even knowing it, which I think is kind of cool. I wouldn't consider that unfair. I think people understand the concept of indestructible armor very well, like parts of enemies that are invulnerable, like the front of an oppressor, or just, you know, when a dreadnought is invulnerable. I think people understand that just fine. But when it sort of gets a little bit more granular, a little bit less obviously obstructive, armor becomes more abstract, especially more abstract than weak points. Apparently also they made the Praetorian no longer be able to be staggered by weapons. Staggering is sort of just the general stopping power that their weapons have, where enemies sort of just, you know, jutter a bit when you shoot them. It's weird to think about the Praetorian doing that. Nothing that big should really be staggered. You know, I think the biggest thing that really gets staggered is like wardens. They're not that big, not really. So that's good. Apparently, swarmers now slow the players for a short duration when attacking. Is this still a thing? I guess maybe we'll find out. But is that a thing? Because that sounds bad. I don't think it's a thing. It definitely feels like it when you pickaxe them, because for some reason using your pickaxe slows you down. There is that. So, more changes to support and resupply pods. The resupply pod now comes equipped with only 2 ammo and health refills instead of the previous 4. Do you grab it for yourself or leave it for someone more needy? This is really, really interesting, because that sort of definitely goes against sort of how they usually do things. And obviously, resupply pods, there are 4 refills attached to them now. The fact that there wasn't at any point is once again something that's a little bit hard to imagine, because the game is so focused around the team of 4 that it's just a bad idea to only have 2 refills on a resupply. That's just going to cause so much friction. I think the idea is that it 100% refills you, though. Maybe. It's very, very odd. But thank God they went back on that. I reckon that's probably changed like pretty soon after this, because that is just not a good idea. Resupply pods need to have the 4 on them. It just wouldn't work otherwise. Although we do have some words on the UI elements, as in the UI elements of pods are not in the HUD anymore, but the button to choose it is still what it was, or what it is, 5. To toggle through the different pods, press R while having the pod selected. So what they mean by the UI element of the pods, that's like the blue sort of outline that you get whenever you call anything down, or, you know, when you want to place like your turrets or what have you. And it's interesting that they already had, you know, or they built a system for you to be able to cycle through different support drops that you could call in, which is another reason why I would ask, why don't we bring that back? Because that's the shit, man. Come on, I want different support drops. That's something I really want to see, man. It might not be on my wish list though. It's on my general wish list, but it might not be on my 2023 like need to do wish list. Either way, it's interesting that they had that infrastructure there. It's almost like they plan to add more to it, but the reality is they stripped it back to the bare essentials, which is just resupply pods. Which is why I want to see them do more of it, because I think there's potential there that they saw, but they just doubled back in favour of, I guess, other things. And there are other more important things, admittedly, like zipline controls. Using the zipline no longer requires you to hold the button down. Walk up to a zipline, press E once to attach to it, press E again while on the zipline to change direction, and press jump to detach. So the controls are essentially changed to exactly what they are now, but the fact that you have to hold onto it the entire time, that is, what is the word? Grueling. That is crazy. Thank God they changed that, you know? The shit that people give the zipline would be so much more justified if that was still the case. Maybe it is justified, not I don't find it particularly justified, but you know, if I would be giving you a lot of shit if you were to hold the button the entire time, good lord, that would just make it it is the worst reversal tool, but that would have just made it the worst thing ever made, really. Thank God it's not that still. Could be better, but thank God it's not. Thank God you don't have to hold the button down anymore. Inventory caps. Mining beyond what you can carry will make the overflow drop onto the floor. Other players can pick your leftovers up, or you can deposit your current inventory and return to pick it up yourself. So what happened before? Did it just disappear if you mined? I guess so. So thank God they changed that, because that helps so much, especially when you're, you know, when it comes to being under a lot of pressure. You just got to mine that nitra. Even if it gets left on the floor, then at least you can come back for it later. You don't have to mine it. And, you know, if you're doing something with pots of gold, a lot of people just mine straight onto the floor. You know, they mine even when the inventory's full. Imagining a time when you couldn't do this sounds excruciating. So that's a big sort of makes sense mechanic, but also a big quality of life change. And I think when those two things come together, you get some of the best changes and additions. So good on them for that. And that's actually the end of this update, or that's the whole thing. So in evaluation, it's like, this is, I wouldn't call it the most like impactful overall, or sort of just in concept, but take every individual thing that was added has had significant sort of effects on the game later down the line, or at least has been a very positive change or a very positive push in a significant direction. The most important thing, obviously, being the introduction of Nitra and the space rig. I mean, that's some crazy shit, you know? Like, the space rig is so goddamn important. And the fact that, you know, it had to be introduced, it feels like something that Deep Rock would have been very initially conceived with. And the fact that it wasn't is kind of nuts to think about. But, you know, it needed to be added at some point, and it was, and that has, I wouldn't even say changed the game, that has made the game in a lot of ways. And I feel like there's always something from these updates that sort of makes the game, you know, like next time, the Dreadnought, although I think Space Rig is probably a bit more important than just a Dreadnought, but Dreadnoughts are still a pretty big deal, and we'll get to that next time on Update Retrospective. But for now, that was Update Retrospective, Update 4, Home in Orbit. In terms of impact, I'd probably rate it, God, number ratings so arbitrary. 8, considering how much was sort of taken away, or maybe even a 7.5, like how much of this was changed or taken away. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's arbitrary, maybe I shouldn't even bother doing that. Either way, that was this. I was Harry from Barrel Vision. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to rock and stone, and by rock and stone I do of course mean like and subscribe, and I'll see you at midnight.